Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about the views of the Korean-born philosopher Byung-Chul Han. And here I'm not going to focus in on one of his works in particular, but I'm going to draw from a variety of them. He's written lots of shorter books, if you don't know. Okay. Well, so one thing that Han talks quite a bit about are some of the problems with our phones and with social media. More specifically, the negative effects that these things have on us. And one problem in particular that he talks about with living on and through our smartphones is that, in a sense, we're losing our bodies, or we're becoming less embodied. That's to say, by things like texting and living on and through social media, we avoid direct contact with others, and we strip communication of its physicality and its touch. As Han says, what this technology does is it dismantles the real. Actually, even our relationship with our hands change, he says. And actually, before I touch on that, I should mention that this is something that Heidegger warned us about quite a while back, at the time of the introduction of word processing, in fact. You see, part of Heidegger's concern with typewriting or word processing compared to a simple handwriting is that for him, it takes away the work of our hands. Now, this might seem silly, but actually, for Heidegger, our hands are very, very important. And that's because, in a primordial way, they're the conduit to the world. They connect us to the soil and to the earth. They're who we are. They're what makes us human in a way. Okay, well, so Han says something similar. What he says is that digital technology is making our hands waste away. What's happening today, he says, is that we're fingering things, not handling them. Our hands have been reduced to a finger, just tapping and swiping something that is in itself in the cloud and non-terrestrial. And what's more, there's no resistance and there's no labor in any of this. As Han says, this fingering has nothing to do anymore with working hands formed of the clash of shovel and earth. No, our hands have become obsolete. Nope, today the digital human, he says, just fingers the world. Okay, well, that doesn't seem very good, does it? But Han's not done. No, there's a lot more that's problematic with our phones and social media for him. So let me just focus in on one here. Okay, so what our phones also do is they create for us an imaginary and a narcissistic world. One in which we can enclose and cover ourselves like a warm blanket. In this way, we eliminate all traces of what Han calls the other. As he says, the other does not speak via the smartphone. Okay, but what does he mean by the other? Well, the other is pain. The other is hell. The other is strange. The other is different. The other is, well, the other is not me. Okay, well, what communicating through and living inside of our smartphones does is it serves to avoid the unfamiliar. And instead, it safeguards a space for the same and the like-minded. It's a place where we can adapt the world to our needs and desires. It becomes our echo chamber. as Han says, it becomes a place of narcissification of self. Actually, you know what? Speaking of narcissism and echo chambers, this makes me think of the actual mythological story of Narcissus and Echo by the Roman poet Ovid. So, if you don't know, basically Narcissus was this beautiful young man who was desired by everybody who saw him. And there was one young woman in particular, Echo, who really loved him. She had a bit of a problem, though. She was limited in her speech to repeating back what others said. So not only was it not possible for her to speak first to someone, but when Narcissus finally gave her the time of day and spoke to her, all she could do in response was to echo back his phrases to him. Well, so what's the moral of the story here? Well, it's that like the self-absorbed Narcissus who only gets back from Echo what he himself has already said, so too in real life, the narcissistic person doesn't fully hear what others have to say, but only what they want to hear. Well, this sounds a bit like the echo chamber many of us inhabit now, doesn't it? As Han himself says, our smartphones and social media draw us into an endless ego loop, where we hear what we want to, and where we eventually indoctrinate ourselves with our own ideas. Now, we should remember something pretty important about the mythological story. You see, what I didn't mention is that what happened is that Narcissus eventually withered away and died because he couldn't draw himself away from his own reflection in the water. Now, this is the fate of self-love and comfort, isn't it? Namely, the world shrinks considerably and the bounty of life gets passed over. Well, so too with us and our smartphones and social media, says Han. Our horizon of experience and understanding becomes narrower and narrower until what remains of us is a shell of our former selves. Okay, but I want to briefly get back to this idea of the other again, but in a slightly different context. Because for Han, it's actually a theme that permeates all of his work. So this idea of the erosion of the other, or the elimination of the different and the disturbing, is not just something that applies to our world of smartphones and social media. It also applies to our thinking in general. You see, for Han, our thinking is also changing dramatically too. What's happening is that it's becoming increasingly calculative and practical and informational and data-driven. But here's the thing. Mere massive information, or what we might call Google knowledge, doesn't transform us. It doesn't rise to the level of genuine insight, says Han. Okay, well, so what's the solution to this? Well, we need to bring back the other into our thinking. Okay, but what does this mean exactly? Well, okay, so in order to begin to answer this, let's talk about someone that we've all heard about, I'm sure, Socrates. And be patient. I promise I'll make this relate. Okay, so Socrates is of course known to most of us simply as this famous philosopher, right? Okay, but here's the thing. There were a couple of things that were even more important and fundamental about him that we need to know. Namely, he was strange and he was a lover. And as we'll see, these two things are deeply connected and they underlie his philosophy. Okay, so let's take this idea of his strangeness first. So As a matter of fact, Socrates was considered so unique that his friends and his disciples referred to him as a topos, a word of Greek origin. Now, what does this mean exactly? Well, what it literally translates as is out of place. Now, that's what Socrates was. He was unplaceable, off the map, unclassifiable, and even disconcerting. He was just foreign to the world of most humans. And by extension, so was his thinking. That's to say, instead of legitimizing and conforming to what was already known, he showed how it was possible to question and think completely differently. As Socrates says himself in Plato's Apology, he says, "I care nothing for what most people care about." Now, this is part of the atopia of Socrates. Or to put it another way, here Socrates exemplifies the other that Hahn talks about and that he thinks is missing from our thinking today. Okay, but Socrates wasn't just strange in this way. He was also a lover, or under the patronage of the god Eros. And that's really significant. Actually, in one of Plato's dialogues in the Symposium, Plato seems to suggest that Socrates, as philosopher, just is Eros personified. Okay, but what do I mean by all of this, and why is it important? Well, for starters, it means that there's something divine-like in Socrates, and so something out of this world. Now, that's another aspect of his atopia, or strangeness, or otherness. But it's not just this. It's also the way that he talks to people and the words that he weaves. It's the intoxicating and the transformative effect that his arguments and speeches have on other people. It's all charismatic and it's all very magnetic. Now, this is the consequence of love, or eros. What Socrates is doing is he's breathing life into words, into philosophy through eros. In other words, and as Hahn says, what Socrates understands is that logos, or strict philosophy, is completely powerless without the force of eros behind it. Now, this is what made a thinker like Socrates so powerful, and why it is what he said moved and unsettled people. It's because love and seduction animated his thinking. It's because logos and eros were intimately related. Eros, then, when paired with thinking, makes thinking something altogether different. As Heidegger says, it gives thinking wings and causes it to deviate from the norm, to venture onto untrodden paths. Okay, well, I think that what Socrates here does is he stands for the other that Hahn thinks is missing from our thinking today. So what we need to do is we need to bring Socrates' strangeness back into our world, back into the world of the same and the calculative and the algorithmic and the predictable. We need to bring some critical questioning back into our thinking, some resistance, some disquiet, some uncanniness, some flights of fancy and spirit moved by the beating wings of Eros. We need the kind of thinking that makes the world appear in a whole different light. Now, couldn't we all use a little bit more of that? Bye for now.